Hello, boys and girls. Board now back with you for this week's review of the X-Files. So this is, of course, Season 1, Episode 2. It is called Deep Throat. So a pretty big episode. It's the debut of a pretty big character when it comes to the first season, and that is the title character of the episode, Deep Throat, played by Jerry Haddy. I think that's how you say his name, who was a really big character actor around this time. He was in films such as Cujo and Big Trouble in Little China, a big 80s favourite of mine. So quite a big queue really to get him for the X-Files. And of course there's a real life sort of reference there. There was a real life Deep Throat as well, so they're sort of playing with that. But yeah, he debuts in this episode, and he's an informant who during the first season gives Mulder and Scully information from within the FBI and pops up, sporadically throughout the season. And really interesting dynamic, because certainly at first they're not totally convinced they can trust Deep Throat. They think he could be feeding them false information, that he has like an ulterior motive, and that is to like put them off the cases, to feed them the wrong information, to kind of hamper their investigations. And it's certainly something that Scully strongly believes. So yeah, Deep Throat appears in this episode for the first time. He approaches Mulder in the bathroom, as you do when they're at a bar in the middle of the day, and he advises Mulder to leave the case alone, the case that Mulder and Scully are about to investigate. And he doesn't give many details, but he does make it known who he is, and he tries to dissuade Mulder from taking the case, because he believes that basically his involvement in this case can only hinder future sort of work which they may do on the X-Files. So it's that sort of idea, then you pick your battles in a way. And this is something I think he explains at the end of the episode, but I actually quite like this sort of way of thinking, this idea, because it's obviously throughout the show it's so much about governmental cover-up and conspiracy theories, and about the lengths that the FBI the higher ups go to sort of cover things up and disguise and cover their tracks and stuff. So I think what Deep Throat is basically telling Mulder in this episode is that this was one of those cases where it was always going to be very hard, well, first of all to prove, but also to get the evidence to really force the FBI's hand and basically wrap it up concretely. It was always going to be one where the ball was sort of out of their hands in terms of like really wrapping it up and proving it without any doubt, sort of thing. So I do like that, and great casting with Jerry Hadder, and he has an iconic sort of end to the episode as well, which I'll mention in a minute. The episode's directed by Daniel Sackheim, who's really a who's who of TV directors. He's been in some of the best shows of the last few years, or directed episodes, I should say, of the best shows from the last few years. He's done things like Law and Order, he's done The Americans, he's done House, he's done Ozark, just the list goes on and on. So this is obviously one of his early TV shows. He directed a number of X-Files episodes. The script again is by Chris Carter, who did the pilot script as well. And I mean, looking back on it, I think you can actually put the pilot and this episode together as a pair, because they both deal with the basic ideas of UFOs and that kind of thing. Whereas after this episode, the X-Files do move into more like Monster of the Week territory, and it really goes deeper into a wide range of like creatures and monsters and just weird sort of cases, which obviously it has to do to sort of sustain itself. Obviously it never loses sight of this idea of the truth being out there and about UFOs, and about that being the main kind of focus on governmental conspiracy theories. But to sustain itself as a show, it obviously goes deeper, and it has like these more bizarre, if you like, Monster of the Week type episodes. So I'm really excited to talk about those. But the plot of Deep Throat is that there's this case involving this former military fighter pilot. It's late, folks. I'm really scrambling. And he weirdly went missing for a few months. I think it was a few years actually. And then he's randomly returned home to his wife and kids. But he's not the same, and previously he had like had a freak out, like a panic attack, and we see him just on with these really gross mutated sort of like boils or whatever they're meant to be on his face, just acting really weirdly. And he's randomly returned home, and Mulder and Scully hear of this case, and it's one of these interesting things because Scully questions why Mulder has interest in this, because it's seemingly a missing persons case. It doesn't seem like a natural sort of X-Files, and it's just a hint Mulder has. He has a suspicion, and because of his military background, then there is something in there, because it's out. He flew sort of out near like airspaces and stuff like that. And as we get further into it, it becomes apparent or Mulder's great belief is that this guy was used to test UFO technology, basically to be the pilot for it. And that once they used him to test that out, they basically rewired his brain. That's Mulder's sort of big conspiracy theory here, and that's why when they go to question him, he can't seem to remember like a basic sort of technical question that a pilot should know. There's this clever little scene where Mulder he does that sort of like standard lie detector thing where he'll ask him basic questions first, stuff that he'll definitely know, but then like the third or fourth question he throws in like a really technical sort of thing, but something he should know because it's in his field of expertise, and he just can't remember. So that's Mulder's big idea, is that he was used to test pilot UFO technology, spacecraft, and they rewired his brain, and that's when you get into the whole like discussion of the episode where Scully tries. Obviously, she's the cynic, so she comes up with more rational explanations. Because she says to Mulder, "You just can't rewire the human brain. It just doesn't work like that." So it's a pretty intriguing episode. I think I prefer this one to the second episode, or to the first one, I should say. I think it's just a tighter story, and I think that all the stuff with the pilot and the concept of rewiring someone's brain, and I think just the level of like governmental like cover-ups and conspiracy, it's just a little more compelling in this episode, and it doesn't feel as cheap or like gimmicky as the first episode. I like the opening actually with Mulder and Scully at the bar. That's a good little scene. It has this sort of like kitsch, almost like 90s sort of like direction to it, where they go to it's very much like a rodeo style bar, or that's the way it looked. I mean, I noticed then on the bathroom like doors, they were like kind of like the doors you see in the Wild West, these sort of shutter type doors, which is pretty funny. And again, you get in the sort of dry, Mulder sense of humour that's such a feature of the show. So he asks Scully to meet him at the bar, and he says, "Can I buy you a drink?" And she's like, "It's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mulder," and he dryly says, "Well, that doesn't seem to stop anyone else here." So that's a great Mulder line, and he actually has an even better line a minute later, because when he shows her the case and she questions why he's looking into it, why he thinks it's an X-File, and he just says something stinks about it. There's a certain paranormal bouquet about it, which is a great line. I think that and the line which ends the episode is probably the best lines of the episode. But I absolutely love that stuff, the classic Mulder. I mean, it's a great deadpan delivery, but also I love it because it just has this very distinct, unique sort of feel. It's like this weird sort of out there thing to say, but it's a classic sort of paranoia, noir sort of line. It really jumps out at you. So it's really great stuff. And Deep Throat, who obviously approaches Mulder in this scene when he goes to the bathroom, is this really mysterious sort of character who's going to add like layers to this. And it's obviously a great idea having an informant character, this sort of in-between character, because one interesting thing is that Mulder chooses not to tell Scully about him approaching him, and I like that Deep Throat disappears quite quickly, almost like this shadow, this ghost-like type figure, and Mulder obviously staggers out of the bathroom and is like searching around for Deep Throat. And yeah, Scully's like, what are you doing? What are you looking for, Mulder? But yeah, that's an interesting detail. Then he doesn't tell Scully about Deep Throat until much later, and that's when they get more into the investigation and things start looking more suspicious. So I like that opening scene. I love the debut of Deep Throat in this episode. He makes a real impression. Such a good choice of the casting. Speaking of good casting, I really like the actress who plays the wife of the the pilot in this. I think she's really good. I think you really feel for her emotionally, because yeah, she just feels like really confused and upset, and just you have a lot of empathy for her, and I think the actress plays a great part. Um, and I think it does get into some deeper stuff than the first episode, because at one point she talks about how the military basically has deserted them. You know, he was a patriot. He was very patriotic. He served his country with great honour and distinction, gave his life for his country, and then when he returns home and he seems not quite right, he's suffering from his experiences, that she says we haven't heard from them in years. They just sort of disowned him. There's no support. And I like that because it gets into maybe a real life issue, this idea of sometimes once you've served your country and you've outgrown your use in a way, then there is something quite cold and callous, and they do like disown you, and that they don't return the favour in a way. You've given them loyal service, but as soon as you've outgrown your use, that they don't want to know. And I'm not saying it's always like that, or then that is, but there's probably is something to that. And the other thing is, I think getting into like the whole kind of patriotic sort of thing. And it also gets further into the conspiracy theory, the fact that they might have a reason to kind of manipulate the whole situation and just use this guy when they want to. But yeah, I think some of the best scenes in the episode are at this house, and Mulder trying to figure out what's going on with this guy. Because at one point they take in Colonel Budahas's wife takes Mulder and Scully over to like this other neighbour's house, because her husband also was a fighter pilot, and she said, you know, he was returned and he also had issues. But there's a totally like different demeanour to this other woman. She's a lot more calm and composed, and she's more supportive of the military. Like she doesn't necessarily deny then they do desert people, or then there are issues, but she's kind of says you do expect this from the military. You expect them to protect their own kind of thing. And it's a good scene because the actress is again good, and I'd, you know, kind of she just sort of whispers to the other wife. She kind of says, really bringing the FBI to my door. So I think you get a contrast in like personalities there, where this other woman has it ingrained in her maybe not to question authority, not to question the military. She is a lot more on board with defending them and their actions no matter what, whereas the other wife is a lot more emotional about it. She does worry about her husband, and she does have some resentment towards the military and the government. So it's all good stuff, and yeah, I think as we get into the episode, you get some really good stuff. You have this one character who's like pretending to be a reporter, and he approaches Mulder and Scully and starts asking them questions, and kind of gets them to trust him. You know, he's pretending to be a local reporter, and he gives them information about where they could get further information on UFOs. That's kind of how he appeals to Mulder's kind of curiosity. But we actually find out near the end of the episode that he's not a journalist, and he actually works for the government and the military. He works for like the security side of them, and that ultimately he tries to use his powers against Scully when Mulder is captured. So that's another kind of effective sort of subplot. But Mulder, and I think this is the side where it's still quite basic stuff, because he gets directed to this like roadside sort of cafe, and where this woman who runs the cafe has got UFO photos, and she's selling them. And again, you get some good banter, because Scully's like, yeah, sucker, because he's paying for the photograph. But I think definitely the security guy, directed them to this direction. And I think what's quite clever in this episode is that I think he is like leading them astray, but at the same time he's controlling them, like he's only giving them so much. And I think because they know they're in town and stuff, they're kind of directing them in a way to places where they can like control them. But yeah, Mulder gets some information from this woman, and he buys like a photograph, but at the same time he gets a map off her that directs them to like the air routes near the air base, where supposedly, according to Mulder's theory, they've been testing like these UFO technology. And again, I think this really shows Mulder's like streetwise sort of qualities, the way he can think outside the box, the way he will go to civilians, and because of how paranoid he is about like the system and stuff, he will go to other sort of channels. And again, it's a fine line, because it does make Mulder look a little naive as well, and because of the stuff with his sister in the past, it borders on him maybe wanting to believe this stuff more, because obviously, as Scully points out later, you don't have a lot to go on. You have two photographs, one taken obviously like 40 years ago or whatever year, and one you got from a woman who runs this diner. So you're going out on a big limb, but they have some great conversations back and forth when they're making their cases, and Mulder's like, well, yeah, UFO, unidentifiable flying object. I think this fits the description pretty well. And I'd sort of like the line when he says, tell me I'm crazy, and she's like, Mulder, you're crazy. I love that stuff. And of course, I'm getting to it now. Seth Green's in this episode. Seth Green, who plays Oz on the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and has been in a bunch of other stuff. So quite the cameo here. This would be one of his early appearances. I think he was obviously in it before that, the miniseries. So that was a very early role. So this is only a few years after it. And he kind of plays this typical like sort of teen stoner character who Mulder and Scully like catches him and his girlfriend near the air base, and they sort of, again, this is Mulder appealing to the sort of like outsiders, because he buys them like food and stuff, and he gets like information off them. And it is almost like this comedy sort of scene where they're talking about they've got this special like spot where they get down to business basically near the airbase, and it's like they get a rush where a certain like thing happened and a certain like sound. So it is pretty funny stuff, but yeah, sort of interesting to see a young Seth Green, and they direct Mulder to where the airbase is, and obviously at this point they've sort of hit a dead end. So Mulder kind of takes this. He decides to go on his own. He like tricks Scully into thinking then they're gonna just leave town, because at this point Scully has said, well, Colonel Budahos has shown up, and that's it. That's the end of the missing persons case. But Mulder obviously wants to follow up this other lead, and I think another sort of great sort of discussion they have is about this idea about, are they using like technology, and are they like keeping it secret from the public? And Scully kind of makes this sort of logical argument. She says, well, don't you think they've got the right to do these tests, and that they should be private? Which is a logical like argument, but Mulder comes back with, but at what cost? At what point does the risk to human life becomes too great for this technology sort of thing to be justified? So very compelling arguments, I think, from both of them, which is what I like. But yeah, he goes off to the airbase, and he ends up getting like caught, and that's when Scully has to go in and like rescue him. And that's when it's revealed that the journalist is actually like security for the Mirror Telly, and he tries to capture Scully, but then she turns the tables on him. And this is really good Scully stuff, actually, because she like captures him and takes him to the airbase, and has a gun on him. So and also she says, well, if anything happens, then I'll go to the press basically, and I'll reveal the stuff about you playing with this technology. And obviously that's the sort of exposure that they don't want. But previously in the episode, they've like ripped up like these like film of photos that Mulder took of like these spacecraft, because they did see something in the sky, even though Scully isn't willing to. They saw two lights which appeared to be something very different from aeroplanes. But anyway, you get this scene near the end where when Scully uses that sort of like power to basically save Mulder, but Mulder comes out all dazed, and he doesn't remember a thing. His brain seems to be rewired, or something at least happened to him in the base. And that's pretty much the episode, because they go back to Colonel Budahas's house, and his wife suddenly doesn't want to talk to them anymore. It says, thanks for your concern, but we're fine now, and we can't talk right now. And Mulder's like, damn it, they got to her. And that's when Scully says, let's go, we don't have anything, the case has been sort of wrapped up. And that leads to the end where Deep Throat meets Mulder again, and he kind of says that was basically a case where you would never be able to prove it. It was always in the hands of the military, and they would do everything they can to protect like national security. So you need to pick your battles. But it's a cool closing scene. You have that line where Mulder says, because Deep Throat confirms that, yeah, there is like alien technology being used and stuff. And Mulder says, they're here, aren't they? And Deep Throat's like, Mr. Mulder, they've been here for a very, very long time. And it's a great line, and it ends the episode. So there you have it. That is Deep Throat, and I do enjoy this one a fair bit. It's not a classic. I think there are a couple of generic moments in it, generic like 90s style action moments, but I enjoy this episode, and I enjoy the Deep Throat character, and there's some meaty stuff coming up with him in future episodes. So it's a good debut from him, and I enjoyed the case more, I think, from this one than I did the first episode. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10 this episode. And that means, of course, it goes above the pilot. So there you have it. Obviously, only 2 episodes on the list so far. Next week, from what I believe, Squeeze is the next episode, episode 3. So if you guys want to watch that before I do the review, I'm going to try and do at least one X-Files review a week, and look out for my review of episode 3 next week, and also look out for some live streams coming up over the next couple of weeks. But thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.